Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. So the divorcee Stan Cedar was using one of his patented arguments to prove his opponents are really bad people, and if he proves that, he wins something. The entire transcript will be on Rumble. For your information, just for the heck of it, just so you know that. The divorcee Stan Cedar was having a hissy fit that biological males aren't going to be able to hang out with little girls in the women's restroom, and mentioned that a bill in Tennessee banning biological males, a bill going to the legislature, banning biological males from hanging out with minor females is getting the support of literal Nazis, like real Nazis and stuff, like Hitler. Nine, 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 nine.
I'm Ben Burgess. That was Hitler, but this is Give Them an Argument. And I am joined, as always, by our super producer, Jake Abbott, and our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. And I thought we'd start out with that product of Andy's dumpster diving for GTAA content in the pits of Rumble for a couple reasons, one of which is that it makes me laugh. But another of which is that in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking a little bit about social and cultural issues. Aren't always the bread and butter of this show, including some of the thornier, harder to figure out social and cultural issues. And but I wanted to start out with one that I think is a good example of an issue that's very easy to figure out. If you're hot and bothered about trans people going to the bathroom, you're probably an idiot. I think you should let people take a piss in peace, as you yourself surely want to be able to do. And also that framing that he's obsessed with Sam Cedar having been divorced makes me laugh. So there you have it. Now, in a little while, in the second half of the main show, I'm going to be joined by one of our frequent guests, favorite guests, Matt McManus, Jacobin contributor, poli-sci lecturer at the University of Michigan, man about town, to talk about his brand new book, The Political Right and Equality, the Rolling Back Egalitarian Modernity, which is all about conservative politics and the conservative intellectual tradition as a rejection of the fundamental turn toward more egalitarian values that underlies the entire modern world, and which socialist politics are an extension of. An attempt to say, hey, if we're serious about treating people equally, we can't let one small part of the population control the means of production and have everyone else subordinated to them. We can't have the kind of massive inequality where some people literally eat gold leaf as a pizza topping just to revel in their wealth, while some people struggle to keep a roof over their heads. That's obscene. It makes a mockery of political equality. And that subject, thinking about sort of inequality and different kinds of inequality and why we object to them, is one of several things that have been coming together lately to remind me of a conversation I had just about 4 years ago. So this was, I don't remember exactly when, but it was definitely 2019. I think it was summer 2019 when the Zizek Peterson debate happened. Do either of you guys remember that? I mean, not the debate itself, but like when it was.
I think it was in the late spring or something like that.
Okay, so maybe a little over 4 years ago. I was on the Michael Brooks show back then. I was doing a weekly segment on the Michael Brooks show called The Debunk. And this particular debunk is one that, as I say, I've been thinking about for a few different reasons. Now, one of them is obviously we're about a week and a half from the 3-year anniversary of Michael's death. So I've been thinking about him and my time doing the segment on the show a little bit more than usual lately. Another is that there's been an Interleft dust up over the weekend that we'll get to that part in a few minutes. I want to talk about some other stuff first. But a third is that the basic point about equality is one that is very much an issue in the segment I'm about to show you. Now, this isn't going to be the whole segment. That would take way too long to show right now. Plus, I'm a little embarrassed by parts of it since I was calling in on my phone and there's some audio stuff in my part that's less said about that, the better. But I did want to show you this part if we have the clip.
Ben, welcome to the show. Ben Burgess. He's author of Logic for the Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. He teaches philosophy and logic at Rutgers University. Ben, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing great. You're here with Anna and the gang.
All right, excellent.
Also, Ben has requested that he be on the Sam Harris Tribunal.
I mean, I really think I'd have something to bring to the Sam Harris Tribunal. And it'd be fine.
You're cracking up a little bit. Are you there? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm
Okay,
here.
you're perfect. All right. You always get a sense of Ben's domicile in these calls. You always get like a. I'm glad that we use the photo of him with his dog, right? The family hound. All right, so this debunk, I haven't watched all of this debate yet.
I have.
How was it?
Oh, it was so good.
Yeah,
good.
I agree.
Yeah.
Zizek, I'm sure Zizek did a good job.
No, Zizek killed it.
Yeah.
Zizek killed it, and I mean, just as point of reference, Jordan Peterson's whole thing about how he mugged up on Marxism was that he read the Communist Manifesto, which is like assigned in like 10th grade civics classes.
Error, let's say, although by no means the last, was this, and this is one of the strangest parts of the Communist Manifesto, is Marx admits, and Engels admit repeatedly in the Communist Manifesto that there has never been a system of production in the history of the world that was as effective at producing material commodities in excess than capitalism. Like that's extensively documented in the Communist Manifesto. And so if your proposition is, look, we got to get as much material security for everyone as possible, as fast as we can, and capitalism already seems to be doing that at a rate that's unparalleled in human history, wouldn't the logical thing be just to let the damn system play itself out? I mean, unless you're assuming that the evil capitalists are just going to take all of the flat screen televisions and put them in one big room and not let anyone else have one. The logical assumption is that, well, you're already on a road that's supposed to produce the proper material productivity. And so, well, that's 10 reasons as far as I can tell. And so what I saw in that the Communist Manifesto is
That's
like,
probably. It
all right. All right.
It keeps on going like that. But the important thing is that he caught us. That like he correctly had the insight that the reason that socialists don't like the existing economic system is that we're worried that the evil capitalists will hoard all of the flat screen televisions in one room.
It's part of the whiteboard of this show. I have a grid and it shows flat screens, evil capitalists, and then it's the people.
Well,
Yes,
what he's doing there, at least this was my read of it, wasn't done accidentally, right? Like, I think that was intentional in a way to minimize what people in the middle class and working class are going through and what their grievances are. They try to characterize people who are dealing with economic frustrations by making it seem as though they just want more. They want materialistic things that they don't really need, but that's not really what's happening. I mean, we're talking about serious, human basic rights that are being denied as a result of the system that we have right now, as a result of the wealthy hoarding their wealth, not hoarding their televisions, hoarding the resources necessary to create a system that's just and fair for everyone.
Also, I don't really understand what the other kind of TV that anybody has in the 2020s is. I mean, I'm trying to think of the last one that I saw sold that wasn't flat.
I think he probably wrote that line in like 2005 and he just dusts it off to make the same point over and over again. I think he has to like, I don't know, like an Oculus or something. He needs
or maybe
to,
that's the last time he went to a Radio Shack and was just like, oh, I remember their flat screens and old CRT TVs sitting next to each other. Radio Shack in 1985.
I guess he's a little bit steampunk core, so I could he might be behind on technology or like old fashioned
He
technology.
still got one with antenna. Yeah. I mean, well, actually, I will say, fun fact from my 6 months living in Mexico. In Mexico, they actually do still have Radio Shack. But I've seen it. I have photographic evidence. Yeah. So this clip, I'm pretty sure we just watched, is the first time I think I ever met Anna Kasparian. Obviously, long before we met in person. And as I've already alluded to, there is Anna stuff going on. I do want to get into in just a few minutes, but I did want to hit a couple of other things first, starting with the actual substance of this, because this does tie into a bunch of other stuff I want to talk about tonight. And this sort of, well, look, capitalism creates lots of productivity, and you admit it. Right, I saw you. I have this like signed confession in the Communist Manifesto that you admit that capitalism is an incredibly productive economic system, far more than feudalism or anything that had come before it. Therefore, it's irrational of you not to like capitalism. This kind of argument, which Jordan Peterson has made on many occasions, and did not stop making that night. Is one that I think sort of misunderstands the point of socialist politics as fundamentally as you could if that were your goal, to just sort of, distort it as much as you possibly could. And I also think just as a reading tip, right? Like let's say you don't have time to do a lot of reading, but you can do a little bit of reading. Like, so for example, you're debating some like Slovenian professor who's written a zillion books, and you decide that you don't have time to read any of this guy's book. You're already treading into dangerous waters. But say, okay, he's a Marxist, so I'm going to read some Marx. But you're not going to read like much Marx because you don't have time. So you're going to read the Communist Manifesto, which is like, I don't know. It's like the size of like one section of the Sunday New York Times. And then you get to the point where you, like, let's say very early in the book, in the opening pages, the first chapter, like not the specters haunting Europe stuff, but the actual chapter 1 of the book, you find the pages devoted to this point that you're sort of interpreting as Marx acknowledging or admitting something. I don't know, maybe spare a thought for, is it possible that I'm missing something about his argument, that there's a reason that he's spending all this time talking about it at the beginning, that it's not just that like he's feeling a guilty conscience, so he's going to admit it and then move on, but he's also going to spend 3 pages rhapsodizing about it over the course of admitting it? Or could it be, right, that there's this larger argument that, over the course of history, the forces of production, the ability of a society to produce stuff are built up, and capitalism certainly does that much better than feudalism. But as much as that's progress, right, that further development of those forces of production creates the possibility for something even better, which would be high-tech modernity, this material abundance that's been created by capitalism, but not distributed in the psychotically unequal way that it is with regards, to the different classes of the population under capitalism that ultimately roots in the unequal distribution of access to the means of production, right? And it's not really ultimately about flat screen. I mean, most people, God, even if you have one in every room of your house, that's still not really that many, right? Like, I don't think anybody's particularly concerned about the flat screen TV hoarding. I think that, it might be, I think people might be a little bit more concerned about, housing and healthcare and yeah, sure. If you can't afford to buy a TV, look, why not? Like, it's not like we don't have the capacity as a society to produce lots of them.
Bezos has a bunch in a room.
Okay. So we have one evil capitalist who's hoarding them all in a room. Probably most of them don't do that. Okay. I want to hit a couple other things having to do with stuff that I wrote in the last week, or in one case wrote a while ago, but took out from behind paywall in the last week. So the first, do we have? So we've got this. Well, let me set this up like this. You guys remember 2022?
No, it's too long ago.
Okay. Trying to think what the like flashback to 2022 scene in TV show would be, where people are like listening to 2022 music, we're in 2022 fashion.
It's a House of Dragons, wasn't it?
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Everybody was watching House of Dragons, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, I'm nostalgic for 2022 now."
Yeah.
when they show people watching, yeah, it's a good one. I think that's what we could associate.
Okay,
sure.
So if you remember, if you ever changed the channel and didn't just watch House of Dragons constantly, if you caught a White House press conference, you may have seen this from the person who was then the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki.
There are reports of illegal cluster bombs and vacuum bombs being used by the Russians. If that's true, what is the next step of this administration, and is there a red line for how much violence will be tolerated against civilians in this manner that's illegal and potentially a war crime?
It would be. I don't have any confirmation of that. We have seen the reports. If that were true, it would potentially be a war crime. Obviously, there are a range of international fora that would assess that. So certainly we would look to that to be a part of that conversation.
Oh my God, that's my favorite MSNBC host. What is she doing talking about cluster bombs on she used to be press secretary? That's amazing. She's my favorite. I just love her.
Yeah, obviously. So I was thinking about this clip in the last week where Jen Psaki takes it for granted that if Russia was in fact dropping cluster bombs on Ukraine, that would be a war crime, which, by the way, is one of the things I agree with Jen Psaki about. I think that is a correct assessment. The Russians did do that, and that was a war crime. But then now Joe Biden has decided to send cluster bombs to the Ukrainian army, which is confusing. So I wrote something about this for the Daily Beast. It came out on Friday, I believe. If we have that graphic, very Daily Beastish headline, it's nuts to send cluster bombs to Ukraine.
Which I misread originally as say send nuts to Ukraine instead of cluster bombs. I'm just
The headlines are often very like New Yorker, you talking to me like I'm walking here type of attitude. Like it's like Daily Post style headlines. Yeah. Are you kidding me?
Exactly. Well, it is kind of nuts to do so after everybody in the world, except for the most hardcore tankies, condemned the Russian army's use of cluster bombs last year, when their invasion of Ukraine started. The United States used cluster bombs in Iraq when we invaded Iraq in 2003. In the shock and awe and subsequent, fighting for 3 years. Apparently, after that, we were continuing to use them, which presumably, if anybody doesn't know the basic mechanics of cluster bombs, the cluster is a bunch of little bomblets, is the strangely adorable term they use to describe these. So there's little pieces of explosive material that are spread over an area that the size of up to several football fields. And so there are two issues there. One is that there are an awful lot of even legitimate military targets that are within several football fields of some civilians. In fact, it's pretty hard to find one that's not in a lot of situations. I mean, I remember, for example, when I was in college, when I was an undergraduate, I went to a protest at Fort Benning, Georgia, where they have what's called what used to be called the School of the Americas. Now it has the even creepier name, Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation.
How did they make that worse, really?
That's amazing. For anybody who's not familiar, is this notorious U.S. training school for Latin American military officers, many of whose graduates have been involved in many of the most notorious human rights abuses in Latin America, over the course of the last several decades. And so nuns and priests and human rights groups and stuff have these big protests every year at the military base, the U.S. military base in Fort Benning, where the School of the Americas / WISC now is headquartered. And one of the things I really remember getting out of that experience was it was really striking to be there, because Fort Benning, there are civilian houses leading like right up to the gate of the military base, right? If somebody drops a cluster bomb, right? If like Al Qaeda or some foreign power dropped some cluster bombs or lobbed them in the general area of that military base, that would not just kill soldiers, right? So that's issue number one. Now, maybe issue number one can be solved by very careful targeting, although it would defeat a lot of the point because you couldn't use it in most situations. But issue number two, in some ways, is even more disturbing, which is, okay, you want to continue to live in this country afterward, because the way cluster bombs work, or all the ones, certainly the ones we're transferring, like nobody has invented the infallible cluster bomb yet, where all of the little bomblets go off at the same time. So what happens in places where you drop cluster bombs is that for years or even decades after the war is over, like little kids, like who are playing in a field somewhere, that hey, this is far from a city. This is fine to use to cluster bomb this area. Well, hey, good luck making sure that you've cleaned up several football fields around every single one of these after using them for God knows how long in the war. So little kids are going to be blowing themselves up for years or decades to come. So that seems not great to me. So that's what the Daily Beast article was about. Unless either of you guys wanted to sort of chip in anything else on that one.
No, we should probably move on. But I think an interesting discussion that could be had is like, other than Biden is evil or whatever, of why, right? I think it just seems like such a wild provocation to me. Or I guess I don't know how the information came out, but it just it seems like almost going out of your way to make it seem like we're aiding and abetting war crimes, like you said.
Yeah, I mean it's the official, like what Biden has said about it is that even though we've sent like millions of rounds of ammunition to Ukraine, that they're running out. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a little while. I don't know how long exactly to produce more. And so here's some cluster munitions while you're waiting for more regular munitions. And I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just a hippie, but like this seems like if you have a war where clearly the original Russian objective of just steamrolling into Kiev and imposing regime change has been off the table since spring of last year. And I don't think anybody really believes the Ukrainians are going to retake Crimea and every inch of the Donbass, the sort of maximalist Ukrainian goals. Seems like you got to have a treaty list sooner or later. I don't know. Maybe if you're literally running out of ammunition because you've been shooting off so many rounds over the course of the last several months, maybe you could pause your current offensive and I don't know, have some talks. See if that'll work. That would be my thought. Okay. Other one is that on the philosophy Substack, Philosophy for the People. So there is an essay coming up this Sunday. Andy, actually, we don't have this graphic, but Andy's already made the graphic for it. It's about time, so it's sort of me as Tom Baker, which I'm not totally sure how I feel about. But because there wasn't a new one yesterday, I unlocked actually the very first one that I ever wrote for the Substack 6 months ago, which is called Hume in Hell, and deep dive on David Hume's essays on suicide and the afterlife, which is one of the things that I sort of, when I first started that, I had the idea for sort of well before I started the Substack. And I think that it's, it's like those essays by David Hume I'm talking about aren't ones that I think are nearly as widely read as some of his others. And I think there's really good stuff there. He has this great he has this great line in there about, he's objecting to the idea that a just God would send some of us to heaven and some of us to hell. Those are the only options, by saying most of us, he says, float between virtue and vice. And he says, if you were to go around the world trying to separate out the righteous from the wicked in order to give the righteous a good supper and the wicked a good beating, you were trying to figure out, who belonged to which category. The more you learned about somebody, the harder it would be to classify them. All right, now on a totally unrelated note, let's talk about left drama. So
this is going to get us into hell, though, if it gets us anywhere, right? Like succumbing to talking about intra left drama. Just to be clear, I think everyone on Twitter deserves good help. Anyway, let's talk.
Yeah, certainly at least purgatory. Okay, let's. About a week ago, so this was weekend before last. So Anna Kasparian, who obviously, before I start talking about this, I want to just lay my cards on the table. I obviously am not objective here. She is a good friend in real life. She's somebody who obviously knew through Michael. She's been on this show many times. And spoiler alert, if anybody's wondering where this could end up, she is welcome to continue coming on this show as long as she wants to. But so weekend before last, she was on the show. It's PSA, Sitch, and Adam. Those are the names of the hosts, but I think it's also the name of the show. I was actually on the show once back in like winter 2018, maybe. It was a really long time ago. And it was actually, I think, the first debate sort of thing I ever did. I mean, I usually think of the one with Dave Smith as the first debate, but I think technically this one was, back then, at least, these guys were big Jordan Peterson super fans. I think they've moved away from him a bit. I don't want to, speak for them there. I'm just giving context. So in any case, so there's so Anna was on there. They had this like really wide ranging conversation. I think she was venting about a lot of things that she was frustrated about. And so it was mostly that rather than debate, but there were some very debating moments. And I did want to start out with one of those.
There are sectors of the economy, though, where I think that introducing or having a profit motive causes more harm than good. So for-profit prisons have been pretty disastrous. I don't think that it makes sense to have a profit motive in keeping people locked up. I don't think that there should be a profit motive in regard to healthcare, because when there is, then you're literally playing with people's lives. And look, if you get sick and you can't afford the treatment, of course you're going to be willing to go bankrupt in order to afford that treatment. And I just think that a lot of people have been preyed upon. A lot of Americans who help fund the research and development of pharmaceutical drugs have been price gouged by these pharmaceutical companies. Like, those are issues that I want to find solutions to. I'm supportive of worker co-ops, but I think that what's even more important at the moment and more realistic at the moment is increasing the number of unions or unionized workers. Unions used to be far more powerful in the country. There used to be far more unionized workers, and that gave them a seat at the table. That gave them some leverage in regard to their pay and working conditions. And I think that the dismantling and the destruction of labor unions has really led to some of the issues that we're experiencing right now. You look at some of these Nordic countries, they don't even have a federal minimum wage because labor unions negotiate pay raises on behalf of the workers. And I think that that model is far more effective than what we currently have in the United States. So I want workers to have a lot more power. I want to look, public option, I think, is better than what we have now, but I do really like and support a single payer healthcare system.
Do you understand the opposition to that? Because it's like you said, it's complicated, right? And yeah. I feel like a lot of the innovation in the healthcare industry, which I personally find important. I want to cure for cancer. I'm hoping like the AI stuff will help us move in that direction. But I do think the profit motive does foster massive amounts of innovation. And these other nations that have like some sort of universal healthcare system, I don't know that a lot of innovation is coming out of those systems. So I do kind of feel like they're taking advantage of the fact that we have this model, which I mean, you and I agree it's terrible, like it's too far in the profit motive direction. But I worry about the single payer thing because I think it might be too far in the no profit motive. The difference between single payer and a public option is literally like the government is basically going to abolish private health insurance, and there's not going to be any private business involved.
Well, I mean, look, I think that so we have to differentiate the innovators, so those who are innovating new treatments, new medical, tools, all of that, from the actual healthcare system, right? Because the way that I envision it is these people who are innovating, oftentimes through investment by American taxpayers, through the National Institutes of Health, like we fund a lot of that research and development, right? And then they turn around, they price gouge us. So like that, they'll still exist. They're still going to make money. But the reason why I like a single payer healthcare system is because the government has more leverage to negotiate the prices of those services, right? And so right now what's happening is you have all like this weird fractured system where there's all these different healthcare companies and all these different plans, and there's more leverage when you have greater numbers, right? So if the entire country is under a single payer healthcare system, the country has more leverage to negotiate those prices. What I worry about with a public option as opposed to a single payer healthcare system is that it'll create like this two-tiered system. And as you can see with other programs in the country, public schools, I think, is a good example. They start little by little defunding the public option. You get what I'm saying? Until it gets to a point where it's ineffective, flailing, all of that. And I am worried about that component of just having that two-tiered system of a private healthcare option and the public option. However, I will admit a public option, which is something that Biden ran on, would be far better than what we're experiencing today. I think that the Affordable Care Act, despite what the Republican Party would have you believe, is very much a Heritage Foundation policy that was implemented by Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. It is not in any way, I mean, it's forcing Americans to buy private insurance. That is what the Affordable Care Act was.
Well, not anymore. They abolished.
They did abolish that. So, but by the way, that was the
justification for it. Yeah.
Cost control, like the cost control portion of it. Because if you're forcing everyone to buy healthcare, then that's going to keep premiums low. Except that's not what happened. There was actually no price controls whatsoever. And these private insurers are like, well, you got to buy from us, so we can charge you whatever we want. And that's ended up being a little bit of a disaster.
Yeah, which I like that. I like that a lot. Actually, I think that was like a really nice, tight explanation of a lot of the things that are wrong with having private health insurance, a lot of what's wrong with a lot of standard anti-Medicare for all arguments, why having a public option is not actually a good enough substitute for having Medicare for all. That when you're talking about a public option, essentially you're talking about a two-tiered system, or no, essentially we can skip that word. You're talking about a two-tiered system for poor people and people with means. I mean, if you're poor enough, we already have a public option. It's called Medicaid, and lots of doctors don't take it because they can make more money from the private insurers. So again, going back to this kind of central theme for tonight about equality. I think that actually sort of treating people as being equal and having equal rights and equal dignity, if you're serious about that, right? I think what she gives there is a really good explanation of why socialized healthcare has to be part of it. And I think it also puts certain things that I've been seeing a lot of in the last few days in a little bit of perspective. So, and I'm not sure, actually, the timing might be awkward here. We might have to kind of pick this up in a little bit later in the show. But I think that there are two sorts of levels that I want to have this discussion on, and we might have to do the first Matt segment, before we do any of it. but regardless, at whatever point in the show, and I promise I'm not trying to drag this out to get to it, we're just running late like we always do. But there are two levels to the discussion, right? One is, what do you think about Anna? And then, and there's something there that I think is a little bit more important than just this like one particular individual in media who, whatever. I think she's great, but love her, hate her, whatever. That's not really the most important issue here, right? There's a issue on that first level about sort of how you think about disagreement, how you think about sort of how we kind of try, what kind of tent we want, and what its borders should be. And then the other issue is like, okay, how about some of the more controversial within the left parts of that interview, right? What about the actual, substance of it, right? So I'd had so this, again, I think this aired Sunday before last, and then on Monday and Tuesday, right? So the 3rd and the 4th, people were really starting to get into it about it. People who don't like her, found little clips and snippets that where they thought that she was saying the most objectionable things. And there was a lot of discussion about that in a moment of frustration. And I know something I've doomed myself to forever by writing a book called Give Them an Argument, and having that be the name of the show, is that I'm not allowed to just make a snotty joke ever for the rest of my life without getting as a response, why are you making fun of people? Why aren't you giving them an argument? And, I would argue that there's enough room in life to do both of those things. But in any case, on the 4th of July, I've been kind of seeing, feeding frenzy about this, and I was feeling frustrated and salty about it. So I tweeted this. It's the Ben. Yeah, here we go. Spare a thought for the Twitter detectives who can't spend any time with their families in the 4th because they need to prioritize going through Kasparian's interview on Sitch and Adam frame by frame, like this Zapruder film, looking for problematic turns of phrase to post about, which, look, is, I guess I still think it's funny that, argues towards me going to hell, but but is certainly not giving anybody an argument. It's just rolling my eyes a little bit at some of the drama that was unfolding on this question. But I do think, there was like, okay, so obviously people who disagree with me about this got mad about it, and it all, like, etc. Right? This all played out like a Twitter controversy will, but I think the sort of most reasonable response to it was, okay, but what do you think about the underlying issues? Let's talk about those. And that's what I do want to do when we come back to this. So we are going to have to sort of break this segment a little bit, because I'm actually going to have to be off screen for just a few minutes for just kind of juggling commitments tonight. But when we get back, we are going to pick up on this. But before that happens, we have Matthew McManus from the greatest state in the union, Michigan, where he is a lecturer at the University of Michigan, which is not the, obviously Michigan State would have been better, but I'll allow it. So
be careful about coming to Ann Arbor and telling people that. You might end up in some serious trouble.
Trust me, you're describing my childhood right now. Anyway, so I'm going to leave you guys in Matt's capable care for a few minutes. I understand there's going to be some Prager U on the agenda.
Nice.
A less prestigious university than the University of Michigan, I think, as these things are usually ranked. And then,
but do they have cartoons aimed at children? No, I don't think that my employer has ever gone that far. So
I don't think Prager U has cartoons aimed at children. I think they're aimed at grandparents.
Yeah, that's
Well,
true.
that is a legitimate point. So I'm going to leave you guys to this, and we're going to pick up where we left off a minute ago, finish up that discussion, and then I'm going to talk to Matt about his book, The Political Right and Equality, rolling back egalitarian modernity, which I'm excited to do. I will see you guys in a few minutes.
Welcome to the show, Matt. It's going to be very hard for people to believe that Ben didn't intentionally provide a snippet of Interleft drama and then say, "Stay tuned for the rest of it," and that was unintentional and not just a timing error. But we're going to ask people to believe us on this. But do stay tuned.
Yeah, actually, I was kind of happy with that primer because I saw the internet exploding about that last week, but my parents were in town, so I kind of was just like, all that's for later on. I'll have to kind of get my fix, and so that was really helpful.
Matt, the real poster move would have been, "Sorry, parents. I'm sorry I'm late to dinner, but I have to find out what's going on with Anna, what's going on with the Young Turks. I have to have the perfect take on this. And I know you're only in town for a little bit, but I'm sorry."
Like, Mom, like, don't you realize like I have all this fucking internet drama that I have to involve myself on? Like, get off my back. I need to be on Twitter and I need to like respond to like this weird nameless bot in order to, make my point. Come on.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna subject you to something that's a lot better use of time. Is you're finally gonna learn what Marxism is from Prager U, unless you have some disagreements. So we'll see. But I think
I'm all ears. I want to know what Marxism is. Let's hear it.
Why does anyone still care about Marxism? Karl Marx has been dead for well over a century. Everywhere Marxism has been tried, it has left death and destruction in its wake. In fact, nothing in the last 1,000 years comes close to the amount of tyranny, terror, and mass murder brought about by Marxist regimes.
Just real quick, this guy looks like a younger clone of Prager, like they have
with
like
slightly more charisma too. He doesn't quite have that job.
They genetically modified him a little bit. Or an AI bot. I agree. All right, so tyranny.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you were to sit there and be like, "Siri, show me a conservative," that dude's picture would like pop up almost immediately.
All right, tyranny, terror, mass murder. For some reason, those words they go well together with his image. But all right, let's see what he has to say.
Yet Marxism lives. It may present itself today as postmodernism, multiculturalism, feminism, environmentalism, or critical race theory, but it's still Marxism. So there must be good reasons why it has endured, even flourished in the face of unremitting failure. Say what you will about Marx the economist. He was a master psychologist. He recognized that there are many people in every society who are motivated by envy and resentment.
Two different fields.
Marx speaks directly to them. He tells them that the responsibility for the misery in their lives belongs to the capitalist system. If we can just get rid of that, he promises, we can eliminate poverty, inequality, exploitation, class conflict, war, and alienation. Not a bad list if you're looking to start a revolution. But there's more. Marxism assures us that this socialist utopia is close at hand, available to all, not in some distant future or in the next life, but here and now. All we have to do is overcome one little obstacle: human nature. Marx expressed his deepest views on this subject in his economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. They can be summed up in one phrase: the enemy of being is having. In other words, the desire to own things makes you a bad person. However, you're not to blame. The blame belongs to capitalism. The most common interpretation of Marx's philosophy suggests that he opposed capitalism because it creates an unjust world of inequality, exploitation, and class conflict. Marxism, according to this view, is all about equalizing income and social status. This is true, but it doesn't go far enough. Marx saw the accumulation of material wealth as dehumanizing. The more money and material possessions one acquires, the more estranged one is from his true humanity. And what was that? In the philosopher's socialist paradise, one gets to eat, drink, and go to the theater free of charge and without having to earn a living. Best of all, you get to do it without the guilt of being a moocher. All you have to do is enjoy yourself. Or, as Marx put it, you can do one thing today and another tomorrow. Hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and rear cattle in the evening. Yes, rear cattle in the evening. That's how in touch Marx was with reality. But who cleans out the sewers, does the dirty jobs that keep a society functioning? Ironically, in the evil capitalist society, the sewer cleaner freely chooses to take on his job. In the socialist paradise, coercion is almost always required.
Wait.
So, all right, I feel like he's kind of laid out the beginning of his case. So, Matt, are you on board so far, or is there any errors that you can spot so far?
Oh, there are a lot of errors. I just have to say though that like everything that he's proposing sounds pretty dope to me. I mean, I'm not particularly inclined to want to rear cattle, but being able to go to see the movies for free, fuck yes. You know, I mean, I'll even go see like fucking the new Transformers movie if it's free.
Yeah. Didn't Marx want to move to Texas and be a cowboy?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of fits in with his, with his cowboy aesthetic that he wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think to take it at the risk of taking it seriously, there's like two things going on here, right? One is like, is it impractical to live in this kind of society? And two, is it undesirable, right? Like he's saying to get material goods without work is itself a bad thing, right? Even if you could, right? So I feel like there's two strains there that he's kind of combining with scorn, and that's something that I find objectionable to begin. Like they're two different questions in my opinion, but I'm curious what an actual scholar, more things that are wrong. I mean, we don't really have enough time to say everything that's wrong, but something.
Well, I think one of the things that's really telling is this conviction that Marxism is really predicated on ressentiment or envy, right? Which is a very, very common argument that the political right will roll out, not just in this context, but pretty much any context they can think of. And there are people who make this argument more effectively and less effectively. Jordan Peterson makes it a lot less effectively. Nietzsche makes it very effectively in some contexts. And my response to it is always to say, look, if you were to throw a rock at a DSA meeting, then yeah, you'd probably find some leftists out there that's motivated primarily by resentment, right? That just wants to eat the rich, guillotine them all, and the more blood that flows in the street, the happier they are. But I can't think of any leftist organization that I've been a part of where that's the primary orientation, right? Very often, the way that leftists tend to conceive of what it is that they're doing is much more in line with what he gestures at, but doesn't really take seriously this notion of justice, fairness, giving to people what it is that they need in order to flourish. And there's all kinds of ways that you can connote that without suggesting it flows very deeply from ressentiment or envy. The other thing that I often point out whenever I see this argument put forward is that people who make it very often don't acknowledge the fact that the people who are in positions of power and have enjoyed a lot of status in society very rarely acknowledge the fact that a lot of their inclinations might be motivated by ressentiment. But it's very, very clear today, if you look at the political landscape, that it's hard to understand something like Trumpism without understanding it as a very much a resentment-driven form of politics, right? Except that the resentment that you see on the political right is usually very different than what you will sometimes see on the political left. It's much less, I've been denied this over the course of my entire life and I'm entitled to it, so give it to me now. Or at the very least, you shouldn't have it if I don't get to have it. What you see on the political right is far more often this idea that, I can't enjoy what it is that I have if I know that you have it also. Or at the very least, I can't rest content knowing that you're getting something that I didn't also receive, even if there might be good arguments for why it is that you should receive these things. And you saw a very good example of this with Biden's plan to eliminate student debt, right? There were some conservatives out there who would say things like, yada, 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 bad for the economy, it will raise the price of school, yada, yada. But the number one thing that you saw online was people saying, I had to pay for school. If I had to pay for school, then these poor kids should also have to pay for school. How is that fair? That even came from extremely rich people who came from very affluent families like Ben Shapiro, by the way. And what else is that but kind of ressentiment, right?
Yeah, and I think that I think you usually see straw manning or just picking out the worst of any group. I mean, I think all sides do this, right? So I think so what I was thinking is like when they were talking about people who blame all of their problems on capitalism and not just the fact that like human existence can be painful, I think that those people actually do exist in the left to a degree, and I think that's a critique I would make of the left as well. But when you're painting an entire intellectual tradition by psychologizing it with like one fringe or one strain of something that arises in leftism, which I think, it makes sense that if you spend so much time talking about how the system could be better, you could mix in your own personal problems with that system. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't want to sit here and say that nobody like this exists, but I think it's a ridiculous characterization. And like you said, it's to say that like resentment and envy drives the left specifically, as opposed to other sides of the political spectrum, is a pretty ridiculous assertion.
Yeah, and they're not even hiding it all that much any longer. So in 2020, around October, I think it was, the National Review ran an op-ed arguing for Trump, but not really argue for Trump in any way that we consider particularly rationalistic. The headline for the op-ed was "The Only Middle Finger Available," and the headline is pretty self-explanatory about what the argument for Trump is, right? Vote for him so he'll stick it to the people that you hate, right? They'll cater to your animosities, right? So I'm like, if you want to sit there and chastise people for giving into a ressentiment-driven kind of politics, then by all means, you can criticize some of those eat the left of the rich types on the political left. I have my own inclinations in that direction, but I do agree that if your primary objective is we need to guillotine as many people as possible, I'm not really going to be on your side. But then you should 100% be turning your attention to the people who will say things like, the big reason to vote for this guy is he'll stick the middle finger out to everybody that you happen to hate. And yeah, he might drive the country into the abyss, but at least he'll take them down with him. So,
yeah. All right, should we see what he says about coercion? Because obviously the sewer cleaners are doing it 100% from their own free will, and it's not because if they don't take any job, they will not be able to eat or feed their family. So according to Prager, let's see what they have to say.
Marx never bothered with such messy details. He left that to others. Unfortunately, those others always turn out to be megalomaniacs, like Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Castro, Pol Pot, and Hugo Chavez. They were the ones who brought Marx to life and in the process caused tens of millions to suffer and die. Contrary to Marx's claims, work freely chosen brings both money and dignity. Furthermore, most people work best when they pursue their own self-interest, an idea Marx despised. To him, self-interest turns everyone into Ebenezer Scrooge, greedy, grasping, and unfeeling. Not only is money, that is capital, inherently corrupting, but the acquisition of it can't be done honestly or fairly. The rich got rich by exploiting the worker. For Marx, there's no other possible explanation. For many today, there is no other possible explanation. For these people, Marx offers a philosophical justification for their anger, even their rage. From generation to generation, the formula never varies. Only by bringing the privileged down can the underprivileged be brought up. The venom that pours out of Marx's pen stems ultimately from the fact that reality wouldn't conform to his worldview. It never seems to have occurred to him that people are complex beings with different talents, ambitions, and desires. It may be more accurate to say he didn't care. If people wouldn't conform to his worldview voluntarily, then the state would just have to use other methods of persuasion, like murder and terror. It all made sense to the philosopher as he toiled away in a corner of the British Museum.
What's particularly stupid about that is Marx, more than almost any other socialist in his time, was aware of just how differentiated people are. In fact, I was getting into a Twitter discussion about this the other day. People can take a look at it. One of the things that really comes to the fore in his critique of the Gotham program is he's very critical of social democrats who say, well, in order to establish a good socialist society, all you need to do is distribute wealth equally. So give to each person the same. Now, there's a certain kind of crude appeal to that. But then Marx goes on to say, listen, people are very different in terms of their inclinations, their natural talents, their disabilities potentially, so that if you were to give everyone exactly the same, the result would be tremendous amounts of inequality, right? So this is why it is that we need to think about these questions in a more nuanced way, and eventually move towards a system that rewards people not on the basis of what can be considered equal, but based upon what it is that they need, right? From each according to their ability to each according to their needs. So for a professor who apparently is their go-to guy to criticize Marxism, not being aware of one of Marx's most famous pamphlets where he launches his most influential criticism of egalitarianism is really shocking stuff.
Museum or in his squalid London apartment. What is astonishing is that millions came to believe him. What is tragic is that millions more suffered and died because they did. What is scary is that millions continue to believe. I'm Brad Thompson, professor of political science at Clemson University for Prager University. In a remarkably short period of time, the philosophy of Karl Marx changed the course of history.
He's back.
At the height of its power,
he's back
half
quickly.
The world fell under its dominion, kept there by a combination of fear, terror,
the sequel
and
nobody
brute
asked
force.
for, but everyone's going
Then
to enjoy
suddenly, in the late 1980s, it imploded. By all rights, this should have been the end of Marxism. But it hasn't turned out that way. From environmentalism with its rejection of free markets to critical race theory, which sees white patriarchy as the source of all evil, you'll find Marx.
All right, we're going into new also, I think this guy sounds a bit Canadian, so I have to say, I don't know. He hit that out pretty hard. I don't know if that could just be Midwest.
Well, we do have a tendency to produce kind of hackish right-wing figures from, Jordan Peterson through Lord and Southern. I mean, don't blame Canada for that.
Yeah,
a lot of things to blame Canada for, but not that. But it wouldn't surprise me.
So before we go on to the next part of the series, which is just the same guy talking about the same shit, I guess it's like 3 videos probably coalesced into one. The one thing I thought is interesting to touch is he was saying that Marx believes that the sewer cleaner needs to be forced to clean the sewer, right? And he didn't back that up, But I do think that this is something that some people aren't really clear about when they think about or people who don't completely understand Marxism. And I know there's different strands of thought, obviously, but what would you say, Matt, about the idea that under a socialist system that's Marxist, that the only way to get people to work is coercion or forcing them to do it?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of research in Marxist circles on exactly this question right now, particularly because of the resuscitation of interest in Marx's, it's usually called Republican theory of freedom, right? So the Republican theory of freedom basically holds that you are more free if you are not subject to the domination of another, which basically means you're not subject to the will of another person, their arbitrary or capricious will. And seen from this perspective, Marx would point out, look, there is obviously a circumstance where one could say that state coercion or state compulsion to do something that you don't want to do constitutes a very serious infringement of your freedom, which is, of course, why he would be very critical in many respects of the Soviet Union, Maoist China, you name it. But it's also very much the case that billions of people under contemporary capitalist conditions are subject to the very arbitrary and capricious whims of people that they have very little opportunity to actually respond to in any meaningful way. And anybody who doesn't understand that has never lived or never worked in a workplace that has a crappy boss at its helm. So Liz Anderson wrote about this very effectively, but she points out, look, if you were to go to any contemporary workplace, what happens? 8 hours a day, most of your waking life, really, you're told when it is you can go to the bathroom, when it is you can eat, who it is that you can contact, what it is that you're going to do, how it is that you're going to produce, and then all the labor that you produce is expropriated by you, sold by another person, and you're given a wage and told that if you don't like it, you can go to another firm where pretty much exactly the same kind of conditions pertain. And Marx's point would be, look, that's very much a kind of domination, right? For most of your waking life, you have very little say over even these very intimate kind of life processes, like who do I talk to, when do I go to the bathroom, what kind of language do I use when interacting with people, and that's a very serious problem. And it's a pretty compelling argument for why it is that we would want to change the relations of power that exist within the workplace by establishing more democratic forms of economic organization.
All right, let's see. Let's see. I always like when they make the jump to the other forms of Marxism, like racial equality and stuff. So let's see what he has to say.
Marxism at its root The leaders of Black Lives Matter, for example, openly acknowledge their devotion to Marxist ideology. How do we explain this fascination for something that has so utterly failed everywhere it's been put into practice? We can find answers in one of Marx's most enduring epigrams. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Marx was a poor economist, but a talented journalist. The only actual job he ever had.
Wait.
He knew how to turn a phrase.
Didn't he say he was a good economist in the last video?
But what does this slogan even mean?
No, he kind
According
of
to what
implied that he was
ability?
a crappy economist, but he was a good psychologist. So he's a good psychologist. He's a good journalist. At the end, he's probably going to say that he's a good philosopher. So Marx would be talented at pretty much every academic endeavor and every literary endeavor except economics by the end of it.
He did great work by his patients. He got them on. He really improved their mental health.
According to what need? And who determines anyone's ability or anyone's need? Marx never bothered to answer these obvious questions. He had much bigger things on his mind, nothing less than the creation of an entirely new kind of world for an entirely new kind of human being. Marx believed that by altering man's economic and political institutions, he could alter,
because there's nothing new about
rewire
capitalism,
the human
right?
brain. He could conjure a
The
new
economic and political
consciousness
institutions
that
just
would
fall down from heaven and they're given to us. And
Yes,
we have no choice but to accept them.
Capitalism didn't radically reshape the world that Marx was living in over the. All right, so I just wanted to freeze on this image because this is.
I do love that image. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Dr. Marx, paging Dr. Marx. We need a brain massage.
When I became a socialist, 6 or 7 years ago, by reading just different random dirtbag leftist tweets, this is what was happening to me. Basically, this was the image of them reaching into my brain and making me a leftist.
It's Matt Crispin was doing the massaging of your.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if you know this, but when Jordan Peele was writing Get Out, he was actually deeply inspired by Marxism. So.
Replace the old false one. This new man would be less selfish and acquisitive and more altruistic and communal. In short, he would be a superior type of man. Of course, this new man could only reach this goal if he wasn't preoccupied with having to earn money. According to Marx, money and the pursuit of it ruined everything. Marx hated money, maybe because he never found a way to make it. Getting rid of it was central to his worldview. Once a person's subsistence, one's daily bread, was distributed on the basis of need rather than greed, man's natural communal affections, long suppressed by his capitalist overlords, would be renewed. This is Marx channeling the 18th century French social thinker Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the few people Marx admired. According to Rousseau, this is what you must do if you want to create a new society. He who dares to undertake the making of a people's institutions must feel himself capable of changing human nature, of transforming each individual who by himself is a complete and solitary whole into part of a larger whole from which the individual receives his life and his being. Understand this, and you understand not only a key feature of Marxist thought, but the dark history of the 20th century. Marx took Rousseau literally.
I want to get into Rousseau quick, but Matt, you are either Christian or had a Christian upbringing, right? Much. I'm Jewish, but I just really wonder how these guys, a lot of the main Bible verses, right? Like Matthew 6:24. I'm looking it up. I didn't memorize this, but no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. I don't understand how, supposedly these Christian nationalist people, present the pursuit of money as something that's actually really holy and what you should be doing, as opposed to this evil Marxism. Is there no tension there? I feel I honestly have trouble understanding how they put forth this argument.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you can see references to exactly this kind of point throughout the Western canon, in quotation marks, right? Well-known critical race theorist Aristotle once was very critical of people who possess kind of inquisitive natures, because he pointed out that, listen, money is just a means to an end, and so any society which prioritizes making money as an end in and of itself has become inherently perverted and unvirtuous, right? Now, that doesn't mean he was opposed to certain kinds of economic activity or for making money if you had some kind of higher aspiration for it. But this was very central to his critique of certain kinds of economism very, very early on. And Marx is highly indebted to many of these lines of thinking, right? In fact, one of the things that's really interesting about his work is that of all the classical philosophers that he singles out for praise, Aristotle is the one that comes up most frequently exactly on this point. Now, he chastises Aristotle for not recognizing that one of the reasons classical philosophers could be critical of trying to make money is, of course, because they lived within a slave society. This mode of production was invisibilized, so they could have this kind of hoity-toity attitude towards labor and acquisitiveness because, you know, somebody was doing all their work for them. But he does take this idea that transitioning to a society where the pursuit of money becomes an end in of itself is a very bad thing, or at least a very damaging thing, seriously. And in that respect, he falls within a long tradition of auspicious thinkers who held exactly the same kind of points.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious. I don't know. This one just doesn't pass the sniff test. The idea that becoming obsessed with money and material goods doesn't have some kind of corroding effect on one's soul is, I think, just kind of one of the more ridiculous dogmas of capitalism. But anyway.
No, and I should say this is also related more generally to his theory of freedom. So it's something that we should talk a tiny little bit about, right? So one of the things that's interesting about Marx is the fact that he continuously stresses how it is that the social relations that human beings create are then reified by them and perceived to be natural or immutable. And then this in turn imposes certain kinds of imperatives upon people that if they recognized as their own creation, they could change if they wanted to. But since we don't recognize them as flowing from the forms of reification that we instantiate, we're not able to actually change them in any meaningful way. And the reason this is important is, of course, he says that under capitalist conditions, we have to understand that the kinds of unfreedom that emerge in our society aren't natural, and they certainly aren't inevitable. They're the kinds of things that humanity imposes upon itself. And it takes the form of this kind of alien capitalist totality that's perceived by us to be imposing its imperatives upon us, when really, if we stopped investing it with this kind of power, then it would cease to be able to do so, right? And this is one of the things that's so problematic about money for Marx. It's not that he doesn't understand the functional role that money has to play as a medium of exchange in a capitalist system. It's just that by prioritizing the accumulation of money over other kinds of human endeavors, we are perpetuating the reification of the capitalist global totality and the forms of unfreedom that are associated with that, rather than recognizing that if there are various forms of unfreedom that emerge under these conditions, it's within human power to change it.
Yeah, and I mean, all we have to do are watch. This is a good time for you to come in, Ben. But all we have to do are watch family movies from the '90s, right, to see the too many husbands are spending too much time on their giant business phones as opposed to, pursuing, who've become obsessed with money and business over their family to understand this point. But Ben, we're about to do the jump into like racial Marxism and stuff, I think. Ooh. So yeah.
Human nature had to be returned to its allegedly pure, selfless state before capitalism, with its enlightenment and Judeo-Christian values, corrupted him. But creating this new man would be a formidable task. Marx anticipated that many would object, especially the owners and managers that had a large stake in the capital.
Ben, we do have to say you missed an animation of Marx literally opening up the man's brain and brainwashing him, and there's like a Tim and Eric like squish effect that like the sound that of like when someone takes like pasta and like mushes it around, like that kind of effect. So that's why the guy has like bolts in his head, because his head comes. Just that's important context to understand what's going on.
I do love also how like the Monopoly Man made a cameo in this.
System.
Yeah, I also two things about this. Just from, look, I'm sure I'm missing lots of context. missed the first half of it, and they probably laid out a whole rigorous and convincing intellectual framework that would make sense of everything they're saying right now. But just two quick thoughts. One, a phrase that you are never going to find anywhere in the voluminous collected writings of Marx and Engels is "new man." That's not in there. Search for that one in vain. I think about the closest that he comes is, some of the stuff about species being, where his point is that, people are not free to sort of pursue their own kind of self-directed creative projects in life, because they have to hustle all the time to make their daily bread, and that, that'll change for the better under socialism. But really, where is Marx saying, oh, actually, people are going to be great? Or never mind, like that's the goal, right? That it's like, oh, I'm really concerned that people are just too personally immoral. The thing that I really want above all else is to create better people. I think this kind of focus on individual morality or what's going on in individual souls is sort of very much the opposite of what Marx was interested in, focused on. So that's one point. Second point is it is just kind of hilariously anachronistic. You're talking about 19th century writers to use this phrase Judeo-Christian that like nobody anywhere used until the mid 20th century.
Yeah, well, you missed one big thing that you didn't know is that Marx is a terrible economist, but he's a great psychologist and a great journalist as well. So it's a lot of damning with not even faint praise, weird praise. But anyway, let's
2 out of 3 talents ain't bad, right?
Two out of 3. Yeah.
We'll watch a few more minutes.
Friendly persuasion wasn't going to get the job done. Only the ruthless application of state power would be up to the task. Marx was all for it. Private property, wage labor, competition in profits, these would have to go. The state, now run by the workers themselves, the dictatorship of the proletariat, as Marx called it, would control production and pricing. It would wisely manage the economy, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And imagine how wonderful it would be. No more ego, no more self-interest. Instead, everybody working for the benefit of everybody else. Peace, love, and harmony. For many, it's a very seductive idea. Who wouldn't aspire to live in such a world? Look around, a Marxist might say. The powerful exploit the weak, crushing the majority's noble aspirations, your aspirations, just so they can have more. It's unfair and unjust.
It is kind of funny that
How much better if we just
that
start
video
over?
looks exactly like the professor giving that video. Can you go back a second? Yeah, right there. Just doesn't it look exactly like the professor?
Yeah, I was gonna. Okay, you know what? You're right. That does look like him.
They definitely have the same barber. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say it looked like a artist rendition of John Roberts handing down one of his anti-labor rulings for the Supreme Court. But yeah, there is like really so much wrong with the last couple of minutes, but just to pick on a couple of the big things, the dictatorship of the proletariat, sounds scary because it has the word dictatorship in it, which we associate with like rule by a single person. Although if you hear the rest of the phrase of the proletariat, right, that's pretty clearly not what's meant in context there, right? I think that means like rule of the working class. That the working class majority of society is, taking charge and is sort of, calling the shots temporarily. Like the analogy is to like a dictatorship in the Roman Republic, where it'd be a temporary thing, and then they'd, go back to something else that is sort of like stepping in to take charge of things, to reorganize the economy, in the interest of getting rid of classes entirely. Marx is the only time, and Marx and Engels actually very rarely use this phrase. It only shows up a few times and their writings. They don't say very much about what they mean by it, but they just about the closest that you ever get either of them to explaining exactly what they mean is to say, oh yeah, look at the Paris Commune. This is, this is like the closest thing that's happened to this dictatorship of the proletariat we have in mind. And the Paris Commune in 1871, at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, basically disgruntled workers and soldiers and artisans are taking over Paris. And that was not a dictatorship in the sense they're talking about at all. That was ultra-democratic. They made every state official recallable by the constituents at any time and for any reason, limited maximum salaries of any state official to the average salary of a skilled worker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just weird. And also this thing about the critique, that line they always like quoting for the critique of the Gotha program, from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. That's not like Marx is suggesting that some all-powerful committee use this formula to apportion goods. The idea is that in an advance, he says, okay, in the earlier phase of socialist society, you need to apportion consumption according to what people are putting in production in order to incentivize labor contributions. But in a really advanced socialist society that, automation under capitalism puts people out of work, but on automation under socialism, when workers are controlling the means of production, could just mean that there was less work to go around, and eventually maybe there's so much less work that needs to be done by humans that people can just kind of pursue their own projects without you having to tie it to consumption, and enough people's passion will be computer engineering or whatever that what work needs to be done by humans can get done that way, and there'll be enough to go around that people can just kind of take what they need. And there's a perfectly legitimate argument to be had about how realistic this is, or whether we're ever going to get all the way there or whatever. But it's just this, look, I don't want to impugn the academic integrity of Prager University, but I don't know. I can't help but thinking this is somebody who might not have carefully read the text that they're pulling that line from.
You think? Yeah, no, I completely agree. The way that I've typically understood that particular conception of distributive justice, right, from each according to their ability, each according to their needs, is in relation to his comment in Capital Volume 3 about exiting the realm of necessity and entering the realm of freedom, where in his mature writings, he makes it very clear that one of the ways that freedom should be understood is in terms of free time, right, the ability to engage in projects that are highly personable and that reflect our individuality, but our social individuality. And he also goes on to say in Volume 3 that one of the things that's going to distinguish a society of associated producers from a capitalist society, and all for that previous societies that matter that are oriented around class exploitation, is the fact that in a communist society or in the society of associated producers, we're going to see the development of human powers, or sometimes it's translated as the development of human capacities, as an end in and of itself for the first time, rather than exclusively as a means to the end of valorizing capital. Now, there are a lot of objections that you can make to this, just like you mentioned, Ben. How would one go about doing this? Is it realistic? Will we ever reach a position where we're actually enjoying conditions of absolute, affluence, so that we don't actually need to adjudicate important questions about the distribution of resources? Sure. But this idea that what Marx wanted was some all-powerful state that's just going to give everyone exactly the same thing is completely ludicrous.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. What do we think? Is there have we plumbed the basic? Okay, let's do. I'm seeing Jake saying in the chat. Let's do just a couple more minutes, then we're going to cut it because there is other stuff we need to get to tonight. We can't look. I know everybody romanticizes their college days, wish they could just stay on campus forever, but we can't linger on Prager University all night. So just a couple more minutes of this, I think.
But we're so close to understanding Marxism, Ben. Just 6 more minutes.
They can have more. It's unfair and unjust. How much better if we just start over, start clean? That's the Marxist socialist dream. In real life, it's a nightmare. Needs become demands, and demands become rights. The best are mocked, and the worst exalted. Innovation withers, while the government grows ever larger. Eventually, the productive become virtual slaves to the unproductive, and the society collapses economically, intellectually, and morally. And then the real horror starts. If you think I'm exaggerating, just ask someone who fled the Soviet Union or Cuba or Venezuela. For all its risk and inequities, they prefer freedom. And we should too. I'm Brad Thompson, professor of political science at Clemson University for Prager University.
It's interesting also that for all the talk about ressentiment and envy that was the focus of the early video, it's very hard not to read a certain kind of ressentiment into this claim that there's a group of people who are clearly and demonstrably the best or the productive, and to have what they are entitled to be taken from them by people who are apparently less deserving of it. That's a deep wrong, and it's something that we should have this kind of sneering contempt for. I mean, if you want to start psychologizing people, maybe you should turn inwards and focus a little bit on that.
Yeah. I mean, it was really weird, like, in a couple ways. I mean, I did like some of the animation was fun, but
the brain bit, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Evil Marx.
The evil Marx in the sky when they started talking about society starting over was, But
I feel like tankies might really enjoy some of that imagery of based Marx almost shooting laser out of his eyes, controlling society.
I assume all you guys saw that DeSantis ad about how Trump loves gay people.
Oh yes.
Yeah, which, like, the best part about it is if you're not super hooked into right-wing Twitter, you would think that was an anti-DeSantis ad.
100%. I actually looked at this and I'm like, man, this is like 10 years worth of like 4chan memes, just like blitzed together into a 2-minute pastiche. It's fucking amazing. Like, I sat there and I'm like, every one of my postmodern conservative books that's sold as like an e-copy must now have this ad just like appended to it, being like, here you go, just watch this and you'll get the main idea. Don't even read the book, just watch it.
Yeah, I mean, that, like, because there's this sort of ominous, evil kind of like the final boss of the video game is coming out kind of music that starts with this stuff about how, all the headlines about, I don't know, Ron DeSantis, signs bill to, legalize throwing rocks at, gay couples or whatever. Like that, again, you'd think it was very anti-DeSantis unless you're like, you spent too much time reading right-wing Twitter and that's like, no. That's like all the evil imagery. Like, they literally have Patrick Bateman in the DeSantis part of the ad. It's like, yeah, that's the key, the code here is that all the evil imagery is based, right? So you could do the tanky equivalent of that ad where there's, society starting over. They have evil Marx in the sky. But yeah, it's like this idea that Marx is talking about starting over history from scratch, like, really could not be more wrong.
Oh yeah.
Like, this is this is the same thing Jordan Peterson in that, clip that we started with at the beginning of the show doesn't get. That, in fact, a key difference.
Wait. Jordan Peterson doesn't get something about Marxism?
I would argue yes. I mean, obviously, I know it's a hot take, but yeah. But when Peterson is like, oh, what's going on with the Communist Manifesto admitting that capitalism is super productive, right? The point that he's not getting there is the same one that the faculty at Prager U is not getting, that it's, like, the whole point of Marx's version of socialism. In fact, one of the big things that differentiates it from so-called utopian socialism is precisely that we're not talking about a year zero, shaking of the Etch-a-Sketch, right? We're not seeing capitalism as just this kind of avoidable moral mistake, but rather saying that capitalism builds up these productive forces in a way that creates the possibility of something better. That, if in other words, creates the possibility of a version of materially abundant high-tech modernity that's not savagely unequal, which is probably as good a transition as we're likely to get here. If you guys want to just stick around, you usually go away for this part of the show, but if you guys want to just stick around, we'll do this for a few minutes and kind of fold into the stuff that we left off on before. We are definitely going to have Matt back because we're not going to be able to do nearly as full a discussion of his book tonight as I'd like to, but I'd like to at least get a sense of it tonight, because it is about to come out, like within it's like a week, 2 weeks.
Yep, just about 2 weeks from now.
Okay, so it's about to come out. We've got the pre-order link in the description. So I want to, at least tonight, I want people to have like a sense of what the book is about, and get a little excited about it, and then in a couple weeks, maybe when everybody's done their reading, we can
give people homework, Ben. Then they're gonna pin that on me, and there's gonna be resentment, and then they're gonna try to drop my head off.
So much resentment. We're doing a lot of tantalizing previews.
There'll be pop quizzes in the chat when Matt comes back. Political right and equality, rolling back egalitarian modernity. So tell, this is, I think you're pulling together a lot of stuff that you've kind of been reading and thinking about and writing about for a bunch of different outlets for a long time here, in terms of your sort of overall kind of view of the right, of the conservative intellectual tradition. So, I mean, get us started here with what you're doing in this book.
Sure. Well, like the 30-second elevator pitch for the book is that it's a critical intellectual history of the right that's focusing on its most esteemed and auspicious figures. So, there's the odd dig at Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro in it, because just couldn't resist. But for the most part, everyone in it is working at, let's call it a higher caliber of conservative and right-wing thinking. And the basic thesis of the book is that it's very hard to actually pin down what the political right is. And that's not just me saying that. Conservatives like Edmund Neal, for example, will say very hard to pin down what unites the right. And I came to the conclusion, drawing upon people like Corey Robin.
Unite the right is a phrase that hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
It's all awkward now because the associations, but yes, keep going.
Yeah, that's for sure, right? Everyone's favorite anti-Semites, that's what you think of when you think of Unite the Right. But long story short, I actually kind of cheekily point out that I think F.A. Hayek had the right idea about what the political right was committed to. And in his famous essay, Why I Am Not a Conservative, he points out that what makes one right or conservative is this conviction that there are demonstrably superior people in society. And that those demonstrably superior people, or recognizably superior people, are entitled to more status, more wealth, more power, more political influence, you name it, right? Now, who counts as a recognizably superior person? That really varies a great deal, depending upon the right-wing thinker that you're talking about, and why they are recognizably superior. That's also highly varied. But this is, from my perspective, what unites all the different streams of right-wing thinking together.
Yeah. So I want to dig into that. In some ways, this is like the setup to one of Plato's dialogues. It's like, oh, you know what a conservative is, right, Socrates? Then he points out that whatever definition Alcibiades or whoever comes up with, doesn't apply to all conservatives. But what if the anarcho-capitalists, Alcibiades? Quite so, Socrates. This doesn't apply to them, right? So what's the what's the sort of what's the unifying thread? I mean, you say it's like about I've been kind of thinking about like the sort of thing that wraps together most of what we're talking about in the show tonight as being about equality, right? And that's in the that's in the title of it's in the title of your book. That that this is, I mean, there's certain kind, even if they think that in some sense some people are superior people, right? That's was the von Mises, right? The letter to Ayn Rand, right? That I want to congratulate you.
You have the courage to tell the masses what no one else will tell them. You are inferior, and all the improvement in your conditions you owe to the efforts of men who are better than you.
Yeah, awesome.
Charming guy, right?
Fun people. Von Mises and Rand. Really want to spend time with them. But yeah, so I want to. I guess one way to do this, right? In the kind of time that we have, tonight is to sort of think about like some of the range of figures that you're talking about in this book, since, as you say, you're not sort of doing the, you're not just dunking on, Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson like some tawdry podcaster. I mean, this is, you're really engaging with the wine track, right intellectuals here.
Yeah. Irony
right?
being that, their faces are on the book cover. Thank you very much, Andrew, by the way. I love the cover. But,
please do judge this book by the cover.
Yeah, do. If you judge the book by the cover, then it'll be a much better product, that's for sure. It's the best thing in it.
Yeah. So tell me about some of these people. I mean, like who's the let's go through some of the rogues gallery of who you're covering in this book.
Sure. Well, the first person that I talk about is Aristotle. Not because Aristotle himself is particularly conservative or needs to be interpreted as conservative, but rather because something like the Aristotelian worldview, as I call it, has been hugely influential as an object of nostalgia for pretty much everybody on the political right, at least up until the middle of the 19th century. And what's characteristic of what I call the Aristotelian worldview, which Aristotle himself may or may not have bought into, is this notion that society is basically a pyramid organized along lines of what Charles Taylor calls hierarchical complementarity. So the idea being that people are by nature fundamentally unequal in terms of their capacities, unequal in their virtues, and unequal in what they're entitled to. Now, this doesn't mean that the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid aren't necessary to preserve the pyramid, right? You still need a slave class or a class of natural slaves in order to build things like the pyramids that the recognizably superior or the better people direct them to build. But just because everybody within the pyramid needs one another doesn't mean that they're entitled to the same level of dignity, the same level of treatment, let alone the same level of political influence. And the argument in the book is that this worldview was, for the most part, taken for granted all the way up until, depending on when you want to demarcate it, around the 15th and the 16th century, when, because of a confluence of different influences, Stoicism, certain kinds of Christianity, the advent of liberalism and Protestantism, what became a lot more central in many people's minds was this idea that actually, no, people are morally equal in a state of nature from the very beginning, or they're morally equal before the throne of God. There are a lot of different iterations of this. And you can see this in the writing of people like, say, Thomas Hobbes, right? Where actually Hobbes chastises a lot of his opponents who are arguing for a more conventional defense of monarchy by saying, look, in the state of nature, everybody is absolutely equal in terms of their moral status. They're pretty much equal in terms of their physical aptitudes. And in fact, he says, you might not think that that's true mentally, but in fact, I'm going to insist that people are even more equal in terms of their mental aptitudes than they are in any other kind of respect. And the same is true of Locke with his argument that people are morally equal within the state of nature, are entitled to certain kind of natural rights on that basis, yada, yada. This is skimming through things really quickly. But then in the 18th century, this became less of a theoretical issue, and it became much more of a political one, since people started taking these notions of moral equality very, very seriously and instituting revolutionary kinds of programs on that basis. Whether you think about the English Revolution or the English Civil War, or the American Revolution, the French Revolution, or most prominently the Haitian Revolution, which I think was the most consistent of all these kind of revolutionary epochs. And what occurred with this transition was the realization on a lot of people's part that you can no longer take this idea that people are fundamentally unequal and the model of social hierarchical complementarity for granted any longer. That people were really resistant to it. And in fact, the status quo perspective was starting to move in the opposite direction. Now the default position was we regard people as equal and you have to prove to us that they are unequal in some kinds of way. And pretty much every conservative figure or right-wing figure that I talk about in the book tries to make this case in certain kinds of important ways, albeit, they're all very different from one another in important respects.
Yeah. So I guess like maybe the last thing to just in terms of this segment, of our discussion tonight, to get into, again, just to whet people's appetite, before they go forth and do their homework. Which is definitely how I want people to think about the experience of, watching this. Is it's like somebody forcing you to do homework. But in any case, you've been talking about kind of the origins of a lot of conservative thought, and some of the like lines of historical development, right? But I am, but you also do get into, in this book, sort of more contemporary developments, among these people. And one that I was wondering if you could just speak to just for a couple minutes is the sort of the resurgence within kind of wine-track intellectual conservatism of this like really unabashed illiberalism that in other words, like, I don't know, like, von Mises and, and Ayn Rand, might have been, exchanging private letters about how most people are scum. But there's a sort of sense in which there's a lot of the right hasn't wanted to come out and be totally counter-revolutionary about at least the sort of basic ideals of the revolutions of the late 18th century. That there's a sort of, even like, there's a lot of, I don't know if you even think about a lot of kind of 20th century National Review-y kind of conservatism, right? There's like a lot of posturing of conservatism as even the sort of, representing a kind of defense of individual rights and things like this. And so it is like one of the more interesting things about some of these people that you're talking about, that increasingly you just get people who are like, no, I don't think people have rights. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, this is a fascinating question, and it's pretty much what I dedicate a whole chapter of the book to. So I'm wanting to be able to give you a kind of snapshot of the main things here. But I think I'll say two things, right? One is that, as every good leftist knows, from Locke onwards, right, despite all the talk about equality within the state of nature, a certain kind of economic liberalism has very, very much played a role in ideologically supporting and abetting the instantiation of all kinds of exploitative capitalist hierarchies, right? That's just a historical fact. But what's interesting in the 20th century is just how ideologically rigorous this became, and how much it came to ape a lot of the rhetoric of conservatism. Actually, Sam Moyn wrote a really good book about this when he talked about Cold War liberalism. But let's just go with the Ludwig von Mises example, or an Ayn Rand example, because that's what we're on. One of the things that's characteristic of their work is Ayn Rand and Ludwig von Mises aren't nostalgic for the past. They make it very clear that the old kind of aristocratic European order that so many conservatives pine for was inefficient, boring, but most importantly, in that kind of context, it was pretty clear that the recognizably superior people weren't actually able to obtain the kind of status and affluence and power that was their due. Why? Because many people just inherited wealth, status, and power without having to do anything to earn it, right? And what you see with people like von Mises and Ayn Rand is the development of this ideology that actually capitalism, as a kind of competitive social Darwinian sorting mechanism, is the ideal kind of mechanism through which to allow the recognizably superior people to demonstrate that they are recognizably superior and to assume their proper role within society, right? And I think one of the ways to demarcate somebody who is kind of conservative in liberal clothing from somebody who might just be a right-wing liberal like Hayek is this belief that the primary focus of the market, or one of the primary virtues of the market, is allowing the kind of cream to rise to the top. And you also saw that even in the Prager U video that we were talking about, right? This idea that, well, in a capitalist society, the productive people will be sorted from the unproductive, and they'll get everything that they're entitled to, whereas the people who are intended to clean the sewers, well, that's what they'll end up doing, right? Now, in terms of the history of how this connects with the kind of broader right, which is my second point. There's a lot of good stuff that's been written about this, but the short answer is that around the 1950s, many on the political right, pretty justifiably in the United States, saw themselves as being on the back foot, right? It was right in the middle of the New Deal era. A kind of center liberalism was, broadly speaking, hegemonic, the kind of liberalism of FDR, Johnson, even Eisenhower, Kennedy, right? And at the same time, they saw that the civil rights movement was gaining a lot of steam, and it didn't look like anybody was being able to stop that train. And so what you see people like Bill Buckley, for example, doing, or Frank Meyer very successfully, is to try to form a coalition of groups that are opposed to more or less all of these developments, albeit for very different reasons. So they'll reach out to people who are kind of right-wing liberals or social Darwinians and say, look, you're opposed to New Deal liberalism, so you belong in our coalition. And then they'll reach out to social conservatives, particularly in the American South, and say, they're concerned with overreaching government in the economy. You're also concerned with overreaching government, but in this case, because they're trying to interfere with states' rights. No points for figuring out states' rights to do what, right? So you belong in our coalition also. And so this language of being hostile to government forms what Matthew Continenti calls a kind of joint where you can align these different groups together, even if they're motivated by very different resentments about what they perceive this kind of broadly liberal government as doing. And their kind of trial run for this new conservative fusion is 1964 with the Goldwater-Johnson campaign. And as everyone knows, Goldwater just crashed and burned, in no small part because he tried to campaign as radical, right? Saying that, kind of extremism in defense of liberty, as he understood it at least, is no vice. And the American people weren't going to have it. But what you start to see by the time you get to Nixon with this language of the moral majority is conservatives being able to code their new coalition as the kind of common sense or hegemonic view of the so-called average American citizen. And that's where I would argue the American right, as we now understand it, was really birthed in a modern context. Because from this idea of a kind of Nixonite silent majority or moral majority, you start to see Reaganism, Gingrichism, definitely people like Rush Limbaugh, ultimately all the way leading to Trumpist populism emerge.
Nice. Well, there is so much that we could dig into about this. I think my people are going to have to reach out to your people to negotiate. I'm sure delicate, high-level negotiations about your schedules. So
get in touch with my secretary. My cat will fucking sort it all out for her.
Yeah, I'll get in touch with one of your secretaries and do what we can, get you back to the show a couple weeks to have a more in-depth conversation about this. Before you go, I don't know how. So I did actually want to get your, as we kind of transition back to where we left off before. I think the timing actually kind of works out here because there's a clip that I'd like you to sound off on. So if people remember when before Matt came on, we were talking about the Anna stuff, and we played this clip of her on Adam and Sitch's show arguing about Medicare for all. And she's just sort of given the case for Medicare for all, why the difference between Medicare for all and a single payer matters, and why it's important to have stronger unions, and why she likes worker co-ops, and like some of this stuff, things just kind of got mentioned in passing. But that's like the tenor of everything that she's been talking about for the last couple of minutes. And then there's this really strange turn in the conversation. So if we have the second clip from that conversation.
Sitch, do you want to jump? I don't want to move on from socialism unless there's something you feel.
Well, I mean, I guess the only thing is, generally when we're talking about socialism on the stream, we're not really talking about economic socialism. Though it comes up, at least I'm usually talking about cultural socialism and kind of the idea of
what is that? I want you to explain what that is.
That's good. Yeah. So under the principles of liberalism, that our country was basically founded under, is this idea that we should conceptualize people as individuals and individuals interacting with each other. And yeah, of course, individuals will, get into groups of people and form political coalitions and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, people should be viewed as individuals and be judged as individuals, and there should be some quality of like the laws apply to everyone on a universal standard, essentially. Where the more sort of like socialistic cultural idea is don't view people as individuals. The individual identity is not really important or even desirable. You should be viewing as some part of a collective, a group. And often, you know, when we're talking about it nowadays, it's along racial lines. So it's actually.
All right. So this guy, PSA Sitch, is the speaker, one of the hosts of the show. You know, he's said, oh, socialism. Well, what about cultural socialism? And I think Anna asked the right follow-up question, which is essentially, what the fuck is that? She's more polite about it. She leaves out the middle part. But and he says, well, the difference between liberalism and socialism is that liberalism sees people as individuals, you know, whereas socialism is about seeing people as collectives. So, you know, identity politics is a kind of socialism, even if people are only talking about cultural issues, because people are being seen as part of collectives. And as I was watching that, I actually thought, you know, when we were planning out the show, I thought we were going to watch this before you came on, but it sort of works out. As I was watching it, I thought, man, I want to hear Matt's take on this clip.
Sure. I mean, this is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently. In fact, I was just reading a book by C.B. Macpherson a little while ago that's pretty much on precisely these kinds of questions. And here I think there are two distinctions that we have to make. And this isn't my distinction. This is drawn from Tony Smith's great book, Beyond Liberal Egalitarianism, right? Where Tony Smith points out that many classical liberals in particular were both methodological and normative individualists in the sense that they conceived of society as being a collection of, for the most part, atomized individuals, and they saw the highest end of life as being the maximization of that individual's potential or their happiness or their utility. You know, you insert, you know, your end goal right here. And obviously, any socialist is going to be highly critical of the methodological individualism that's central to what we might call economic liberalism or classical liberalism, because we'll say things like, no, it's very clear that people are embedded in a social system that's defined by relations of power. Very often those relations are exploitative, and we need to be highly critical of that if we're going to give people the opportunity to actually develop to their fullest potential. But there's another stream of liberalism that began to emerge in the 19th century that people have different names for: egalitarian liberalism, expressive liberalism, or expressive individualism. And one of the things that Smith points out is that this philosophical strand of liberalism was normatively individualist, much like Marx was, I would argue, but it was not methodologically individualist. So John Stuart Mill would have no problem saying something like, look, it's very clear that people are embedded in relations of power, and that in order to enable the fullest flourishing of their individualism, we need to take that very seriously as liberals. And that's going to include being extremely critical of the capitalist economy and moving towards something like a cooperative form of socialism, because it seems more likely that the individual will flourish under those kinds of conditions. And then, you know, flash forward to the 20th century, you have somebody like John Rawls, who was also very critical of the classical liberals when he says, listen, the chief subject of justice for liberals shouldn't be the individual and their rights, because that's already kind of presupposing what those rights are. Instead, it has to be the social order, right? Or the basic structure of society, excuse me. And once we realize that the basic structure of society is the primary subject of liberal justice, we can ask ourselves all these kinds of questions, like what kind of rights would people want? What would actually enable their flourishing? Would a capitalist economy be most likely to enable their flourishing? And Rawls, very much like Mills, comes down to this conclusion that actually, you know, even welfare state capitalism wouldn't be fully conducive to the flourishing, certainly of the least well off. So we need to do a lot better than that and transition towards something like property-owning democracy or liberal socialism. So from my standpoint, we need to be very critical of the kind of classical liberalism that is methodologically and normatively individualist, and that leads people to assuming that, as Jefferson once put it, the best kind of society is one where so-called natural aristocracy flourishes, and everybody else just has to deal with it.
What does Jefferson say? People who believe that some people are born with saddles on their backs.
Yeah, exactly right. The very same, right?
Yeah.
And we can be very critical of that, but we should be respectful, I think, of philosophical liberalism. And we should definitely be respectful of liberal socialism. So that's what I come down on endorsing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, one of the key points there is that, normative individualism, the idea that, sure, people have whatever rights, that like the individual human being is the ultimate, repository of moral rights and moral consideration, I think is true, right? I mean, there's no I think that's importantly true, that there's we experience our lives, individually. If you're dying because you couldn't afford insulin, for example, you're doing that, individually. Having your, I don't know, olive tree, destroyed by Israeli settlers, or, getting blown up in a cluster bomb or whatever, that there are, these are all things that happen to people as individuals. But I don't think that, but I think that the idea that you have to deny that to be a socialist is just kind of bizarre. I think that it's because, I think that socialism comes from the view, sure, yeah, individuals have moral rights. The point is just that they have the same moral rights as all the other individuals, and that you don't deserve to have less power over your life or have a worse quality of life, in some sort of dramatic way that the way that social institutions are constructed can impact because you're born into a poor family or a rich family. For example, right? So I think that's the sort of fundamental difference, and this does get into one thing, and I just want to monologue about this for just a minute, and then anybody else who wants to weigh in, can weigh in. Don't necessarily expect everybody to agree with me about all of it or whatever. That's all, totally, whatever. I think everybody has their say, but. When I've been seeing all of this Anna stuff, I mean, I guess, I had a couple of thoughts about it. So one of them is about the sort of issue of kind of how the left treats its own and all that stuff. And then the other one is about the sort of underlying substantive issues. So I think that, I have been really frustrated actually by some of the stuff on the first level. So I saw, for example, there was, so there have been, issues about, use of certain kinds of inclusive terminology that might be sort of unfamiliar or off-putting to a lot of people, but do include more people than more familiar terminology. Birthing persons, that was that whole controversy a little while back. There's been some stuff about some of the sort of gray areas and edge cases, with regard to, to trans athletes, and debates about puberty blockers and stuff like that. None of this, I mean, Anna hasn't expressed any opinion about any of this stuff that surprised me. For one thing, I've been talking to her about, like all of these issues and many more for years, right? I mean, like I have a pretty good idea. These are all sort of very, these are all the kinds of, look, they're wildly controversial issues. I don't have the slightest problem with anybody saying that she got any of them wrong. I'm not totally sure what I think about some of these issues, right? And I want to get into why not a little bit more in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about some of what's frustrated me about the way the discussion has played out. So I have there's this 9-second clip that I saw was going around on Twitter, that there was a high-profile account tweeted this out. It got 15,000 likes. It's this clip of Anna talking about this TYT employee, Benny, who was quit, partially because of her disagreement with Anna about some of these issues. And this was tweeted out as in this way. It's like, oh my God, you're already being criticized for transphobia, and look, you're misgendering this person. So I just want to start with that clip, the 9-second one.
So unfortunately, Benny has decided to leave TYT. I am
definitely heartbroken over her decision to do that.
So the way that this was treated when it was tweeted out is, oh, look at this, right? This is, that she's sort of doing this obnoxious dig, that's how it's being, it's being misinterpreted, that this is intentional. But I think if you watch literally anything beyond those 9 seconds of literally a second of stumbling, and then Anna doing exactly what people are always told to do if you accidentally misgender somebody, which is quickly correct yourself and move on without making a big issue of it. Well, let's watch the longer version of the clip.
So unfortunately, Benny has decided to leave TYT. I am definitely heartbroken over her decision to do that. I wish that Benny decided to stay here despite our, in my opinion, incredibly minor differences of opinion that have been blown out of proportion on Twitter with people encouraging Benny to leave TYT. Benny is now doing her own thing, has her own YouTube channel, had already had her own Twitch channel and all of that. I really, really encourage you guys to go out there and support Benny and the work that she's doing. I think the perspectives that she is sharing with you all is an important perspective. I think that perspective was also incredibly important to have here at TYT. And I'm very sad that she's no longer sharing that perspective here with us. But I have no ill will, no hate, no bad feelings toward Benny whatsoever. I know that she's upset with me. I want to be clear in saying that I've never, ever supported bans on gender affirming care. I am still very much supportive of the transgender community. My opinions mostly center on tactics in order to garner more support for the trans community.
And I guess I don't see how anybody could watch the 1:20 version and think the 9-second version was honest. The one that got 15,000 likes. That doing the momentary stumble. Somebody who, by the way, I believe did use male pronouns when Anna first knew her, and now uses female ones. And I think the idea of a half-second slip is revealing the sort of evil in your soul rather than being a mistake. I think is really deeply implausible and kind of disturbing. I think that everybody will sometimes, even when it's not that, even when you're talking about cis people, I think it's not that uncommon to sometimes make a momentary mistake like that. Yeah. So that's like, I think, pretty representative of a lot of what bothered me. And the stuff in that interview with Adam and Sitch, I would say people taking this sort of these little clips of something that sounds bad and sort of running with it and making this huge deal about it in ways that are sort of based on almost farcically uncharitable interpretations of it, right? So there's a part of it where she's basically saying, well, one problem with identity politics and language policing and all this stuff is that people end up, being awkward about it, interacting outside of their demographic group because they don't want to say the wrong thing, which is actually the opposite of what we should want. And that's interpreted as, Anna is saying Black people are too sensitive or something like that. I think that's really not at all, what's being said there. And I also think, some of the context a lot of people are missing is that, part of what she's expressed on this show in the recent past, on our show, is that something that she's been bothered more about lately, since it's not like give them an argument where you just get on and make arguments and make fun of conservatives and whatever. TYT, there's an actual journalism component, and I think that she's been increasingly bothered by sort of realizing how much people sort of filter the media that they consume, and how much, if you're sort of in one or the other of these competing media bubbles, oftentimes the information you get about different stories is importantly flawed or inaccurate. And I know she's felt really bad about times when she's sort of repeated narratives about different news stories that she's later decided weren't entirely accurate, because that's what everybody in sort of her bubble was saying. And I think some of the stuff about puberty blockers fits into that. And I think there's also a lot of people with a lot of agendas of their own from various directions, who sort of wanted to run with that and present it as if Anna was saying, oh, we should have like DeSantis style laws banning puberty blockers. When not only did she not say that, she actually says the opposite of that in the interview. You know, she says, look, I'm not saying that, you know, that even once you're sort of more fully aware of the medical debate about risks and benefits of this, which there actually is one. I'm sorry, there is. There's, if you look at, you know, at the way this is played out in a lot of European countries, et cetera, there is debate about this stuff, right? So like the extent to which puberty blockers are reversible, there's clearly a sense in which they are reversible, which is you can stop taking them and still go through puberty, right? That's, you know, that's true. Whether all of the effects of them or all the side effects are entirely reversible, that's much more controversial. There are concerns about infertility, et cetera. None of that means that if, you know, family doctors, you know, gender clinicians who know vastly more about this than any of us do, you know, et cetera, don't, you know, might not decide in some cases that it's well worth the risk, that it's, you know, that all medicine comes with risks, right? You know, you're always doing a balancing act. But, you know, there is a sort of simplistic flattening of the factual premise here that often takes place. And there's this interpretation of that, of sort of saying some of these things as being transphobic, that in some cases you have right-wingers who are like, look, big progressive says this thing that we like, and they're just emphasizing the part that they like and ignoring all the stuff that she says that they don't like. And I understand that. But there's also, I think a lot of times the right is just much more strategic about this stuff than we are. They'll sort of, if somebody says 20 things and 19 of them disagree with them and one of them agrees with them, they'll play up the one. And oftentimes for us, instead of playing up the 19, you know, we're like, well, what the fuck? What happened with that one? You know, what's wrong with you? In ways that I worry about, honestly. I mean, for reasons much more than, you know, look, obviously we're talking about a friend of mine. I won't pretend not to be personally offended by a lot of what I've seen. I have been. I'm obviously wildly biased. I'm wildly offended when I say some of these things, and people will say, "Oh, LMFAO, bro, you don't have to, you know, you don't have to do this." Where it's like, oh, what you're essentially saying is, oh, you can just shut up when you think a friend of yours is being attacked unfairly, you know, for the purpose of not getting yelled at yourself. That's not a very nice thing to say about somebody's moral character, frankly, that you think that they would do that. But I also think that, again, what you think about this one person is probably the least important part of this in a sort of larger objective sense, right? There's also a question about how we think about sort of building a broad coalition of everybody we can get to support us, how we sort of adjudicate disagreements that arise between people who share a lot of the same fundamental goals. And I guess the thing that I would really urge people to do with that regard is to just kind of take a beat and take a deep breath and think about principles, right? Like, in other words, why is it that we think that what we think, right? Like just kind of move away a little bit from the yelling about whatever everybody's angry about on Twitter today, but it's like, what are the sort of fundamental underlying principles? So the thing that, you know, that I'd tweeted about this in actually before the other tweet even, but, you know, it was just sort of, you know, probably the more highbrow and well-considered tweet, you know, and, you know, compared to the one that's making fun of people who are obsessing about the interview, is the Ben tweet 2 graphic that what I said about this is the egalitarian values underlying socialist politics are incompatible with social conservatism, but they don't entail taking maximalist left-coded positions on every issue or incident that people draw culture war battle lines over. You can just think stuff through as it comes up. And I guess I want to be really clear about this because, you know, again, I am kind of aware of the criticism of the first tweet that's like, okay, I'm kind of meta-commenting on the controversy, but I'm not really saying what I think about the underlying stuff, and I don't want to do that. I want to be as clear as possible about what I think about the underlying stuff, which is this, that I think there are easy questions and I think there are hard questions. So the easy question, going back to the big theme of tonight, is that I think that I don't understand why anybody would be a socialist in the first place if they didn't have a sort of fundamental belief in the equal rights and equal dignity of all human beings. That that anybody is a person, right, deserves respect, deserves dignity, deserves to have their material needs met, deserves equality before the law, all of that stuff. So I think the easy stuff is like you should reject attempts to legally impose socially conservative values on people who who might not share them. You should call people by the correct their pronouns they ask you to. You should respect the right of adults to do whatever the hell they want with their bodies, etc. Because I think all of those sort of stem in a very straightforward way from the underlying socialist values. Now, I know not everybody's going to like this, and anybody who doesn't, sorry. But I really didn't become a weirdo radical Marxist podcaster for the purposes of like not saying what I think about shit. So I will just, in a very unvarnished way, say what I think about all of it, which is to say that I don't think all questions are easy questions. Look, I was a philosophy professor before I was a podcaster. I do think there are such things as edge cases, right? Cases where different values come into conflict, and it's not always totally clear what the right answer is. Given the sheer number of cases where sex or gender impact human experience, a lot of them come up around this. And none of this is a secret. This is all stuff I said on the most popular podcast in the world last year when I was asked about it. I don't usually sound off about it because I'm not an expert on any of these things. This isn't really my wheelhouse, but when I'm asked directly, I will talk about it, right? So I think that with regard to probably anybody at any age who wants to socially transition, absolutely, I think that should be supported. When it comes to medical interventions that might have long-term consequences, I think it's tough. I think that there are multiple values at stake. I don't think anybody really believes that children have total medical autonomy from the moment they can learn, they learn how to talk onwards. I don't think anybody really has that position on reflection. But I also think that just saying, oh, well, you just can't get any sort of gender affirming care until you're older is a bad position, because you're essentially forcing people to go through what feels like the wrong puberty, which is potentially nightmarish. So on that, what exactly is the right amount of like counseling or medical gatekeeping to do? I have no fucking idea. How would I know? That's not this is not something, not everybody has to have an opinion about everything. And that's one that I don't have because I don't know. It's complicated. It's hard. I know a little bit about it. I try to educate myself about it, but I don't think I have a perfect solution to that. I'm certainly opposed to bills to outlaw it entirely, as Anna said she was, because I think that's, I think that one, the vast majority of medical professionals seem to think that there is value to doing this, and I think that sort of overriding that for the sake of imposing socially conservative values I don't share is not something I'm on board with. But exactly what the threshold is, I have no idea. Same for a lot of the sports stuff. There is a reason why you separate sports by sex in the first place. That's like there, and there is an entire debate about, okay, well, if you've used hormone replacement therapy for how long, does that cancel out the advantages that you'd otherwise have from somebody who's being male at birth? If so, how much? Are there other advantages that aren't canceled out? Again, look, I don't, at the risk of being even more problematic, I do not just devote a lot of my life to thinking about what counts as fairness in women's sports. That's not really at the top of my list of priorities. So I do not have well worked out positions on all this. I do know, I'll say what I said on Joe Rogan, that if I had a trans daughter and the rules were set up so that there was no way that she could participate in school sports, that would bother me. I would think that was unfair. But exactly what the cutoff should be, exactly what the hormone requirements, whatever should be, I expect and hope that there's some legitimate, there's some reasonable compromise solution to this. I don't know what it is. So there you go. There are a couple of big hot button things I do not have a well worked out position on. I'm willing to sort of lay all my cards on the table and sort of say, here's the stuff I'm sure about, here's the stuff I'm unsure about. Does Anna Kasparian get every single aspect of all of these things right? Yeah, maybe not. I mean, these are complicated issues, and I think again, there's all the room in the world to hear somebody sound off on complicated, controversial issues and say, yeah, I think you got this part wrong. I think you got that part wrong. Here's my argument, etc. I think that's totally legitimate. What I do have a problem with is sort of writing people off on the basis of disagreement on one issue out of every 20, even on the broader issue of trans rights. Somebody who fundamentally agrees with us, I think, on the basic question, who even, let's say, for the sake of argument, gets some of the harder questions wrong, or thinks that that like tactically that like certain fights aren't worth having, that you actually do think are worth having. Fine, those are discussions that are well worth having, and if you want to have them, I will mostly shut up and listen, because I don't know a tremendous amount about most of these things. But if you're going to start writing people off as enemies and comparing them to Dave Rubin leaving the left or whatever, even though Anna has actually become much more socialist in the last few years, and as I think you could pretty clearly see from the part of the interview played earlier, has not backed down on any of that stuff, right? Has, if anything, doubled down on a lot of those views, that is not advocating socially conservative positions on trans rights. I think that's a real mistake. I think if you want to build, and there's a lot of talk about like, feeling at home in the left or not the left or whatever, there kind of is no left in America. I wish there was. But really what we're mostly talking about when we talk about the left are journalists and academics and some fledgling left labor organizing that's really important and that could be the basis of a real serious left with roots in the working class. And I think if we're going to talk about the kind of left that we could build that would actually win real gains on material issues, which would, by the way, disproportionately benefit trans people and other marginalized groups who are likely to be subject to housing and employment discrimination, etc. I don't think that we should go around completely writing people off on the basis of any disagreement on what are often very messy, edge cases and dilemmas. And I kind of think like, I don't know, man. I think the entire task of the left right now is to find ways to change the channel from arguments about cultural sensibilities to arguments about material interests. Not because there are no fights that are worth having on cultural that have to do with cultural sensibilities. There are. You can't entirely avoid that. But that's the terrain that I think is going to end up ultimately being much better for the right, because it splits people 50-50 oftentimes, or if not exactly 50-50, whatever. I mean, it splits people in much messier and more unpredictable ways. Whereas I think the more we can fight about material interests, the better terrain that's going to be for the left. And that is my piece. I am going to let anybody else who wants to weigh in on this weigh in.
I mean, this is actually a material interest for people, because I mean, my child has gone through the wrong puberty.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of ticks me off a bit when somebody does step in it, and I totally, like, I'm not gonna. You've not seen me online, jumping down Anna's throat. I've not accused her of anything, because I don't know the heart of her, character. Yeah. I rewatched Benny's statement. I actually did stream with Benny. Go check out that episode of Movie Night Extravaganza. We had a phenomenal conversation about what it is being trans. I think we talked about a terrible movie and it pissed everybody off, and
what was the movie?
It was the Danish Girl. Don't watch it. It's a bunch of white cis people.
Hold on. I heard of knowledge and recognition there.
Oh no, I've heard about this movie. I've never seen it.
Yeah,
it was just acknowledging its existence.
Just curious.
Yeah,
if Matt had actually watched
it's basically a bunch of like people who've never experienced being trans, taking a book that took so much liberties of the actual source material, and adapting it into a film that, okay, maybe there's a few scenes that people can relate to who are trans, but they get so much wrong about it. And we just spent the entire time just ripping the movie apart. They even got stuff wrong about being an artist. Like I was pissed about that. But anyways, that's not important here. I just wanted to point to that discussion where if you really want to delve into a lot of, trans issue is material for some people. It is, I'm very lucky. My children actually go to a doctor that specializes in transitioning, I actually have access to experts on this, and my children, that's their pediatrician. I know I am lucky on this, and not everybody has a loving father or access to such things. And what has upset me the most is that one of Benny's big complaints about Anna is that she didn't listen to her. And you have somebody who's like, hey, look, what you're doing hurts me. And this is why. And then just completely be ignored about it was just frustrating to the point where Anna actually is promoting a actual transphobe. Somebody who was actually going out there putting out anti-trans propaganda and is
about Jesse Singal.
Yeah, tweeting out that this is a legit. I don't know Jesse Singal's
so let me just,
all of it, but I know
he's jump in on this a little bit, right? Because Jesse Singal is somebody who I definitely have. I mean, look, he's been a guest on the show. They have. So somebody I've known for years, and I certainly do not agree with on everything that's related to this. We've had arguments about this, but I don't actually think has the views that a lot of people in this discussion think that he has. So a lot of what I've seen, certainly the Twitter discussion the last week, has been Jesse Singal. Jesse Singal wrote an article where he was defending this guy who is doing conversion therapy, and then Anna's defending Jesse Singal. But there are a couple of issues there. One is that if you actually look at the original article, that people said, this is Jesse Singal defending conversion therapy. Well, Jesse Singal was defending a doctor who's accused of doing conversion therapy and who he doesn't think did. There is actually a lot of he said, she said about what happened there. There's essentially, we're talking about somebody who, there's a sort of debate among gender clinicians about when you talk about very young children, nowhere near puberty, how whether at that point, you should how you should sort of proceed, and in terms of whether people are on a course towards maybe sort of working through the struggles they're having and becoming comfortable with the body they have, or whether they are going to have this more stable gender identity that would require transition, or at least puberty blockers before puberty and all that stuff. And a lot of the more extreme things that this doctor was accused of promoted, Jesse in his article said, no, actually I looked into this and it's really not. Now, my point is not Jesse Singal is right about everything. I think that's like a much bigger argument, right, than we're going to have right now.
I've not looked at that article. I was looking at something else, which actually was feeding into transgender stuff, and I completely forgot what that was.
Okay,
to be honest with you.
so I will say, right? I mean, if you listen to, Jesse is the host, co-host of a podcast called Blocked and Reported, and if you listen to that, I think that the certainly not somebody who's going to support like bans on puberty blockers or etc. And is going to take a much more nuanced position. But what bothers me about all of this is that if is the sort of chain, right, of like, well, Anna doesn't think that Jesse is a transphobe, and Jesse doesn't think that this, in this doctor example, I know you were saying you were looking at a different case, that this other person is, and therefore Anna is, I think that that's, I don't, even if I did have a more sort of, negative read on Jesse Singal, I would, that would still bother me, right? And I do take your point, and I want to be really clear about this. I don't want anybody to get this part twisted. I do take your point that there are materially important consequences to all of these things for the lives of people who are affected by it. Of course there are. They have the sort of larger point about, what kind of left we can build and all this stuff is, I think, a point, and again, even if you think, and, it's, and we're talking about two people who, I think one person I know and you don't, one person you know and I don't, and some of what we're talking about are non-public interactions between them, right? That they sort of off-air conversations and how each of them understood those conversations. And that's going to be really hard to adjudicate. But but the sort of larger point I wanted to make there is just like, if you have, if you want to protect the interests of the most marginalized groups, such as trans people, then the question is, what's the sort of larger political program that's going to help you, get there? That if you're worried about housing discrimination, employment discrimination, lack of access to healthcare, which is very important if you're on regime of hormone replacement, in the long term, etc. Then I think that, I think you want to have the sort of biggest possible coalition of people who are going to support the kind of universal guarantees of all of those things that you can. And that doesn't mean that these hard cases are unimportant. And I really hope, and I apologize if it sounded this way, I really hope it doesn't sound like I'm saying they are unimportant. I don't think that. Right. But I do think that you can kind of hash out disagreements about those things and saying, I think people, even if I had like much more sort of worked out positions and all this stuff than I do, I've tried to be super honest about that. Even if I thought that like Anna was like definitely wrong about stuff that I don't necessarily think she's wrong about, etc. I would still worry about going from somebody who supports 97% of what we want, even on trans rights, is wrong, to they're an enemy. They might as well be Jordan Peterson or Ron DeSantis, and that's kind of what I worry the most about here, right? It's not, my point is not like nobody ever criticized anything Anna Kasparian says about this. That'd be ridiculous. She's a super public figure. Everything she says is fair game, right? I am just a little bit concerned about how we do that.
Yeah, and part of my problem too is that right now, like Tim Pool, who is a threat to my children, I'm just going to make this clear. Tim Pool is a threat to my children. You can clip just that because that's true. Is now using Anna Kasparian as a, and this is nothing to do on her, you know, this is the, you know, one of the things where I always talk about, like, you want the right person to be making the argument sometimes, you know, like the right attitude. I think what, you know, like Emma Vigeland going on Tim Pool's show recently was phenomenal. The way she handled herself on that, you know, overall. But like Tim Pool is a danger to my children, because he is creating stochastic terrorism through his anti-trans bigotry, and is now taking Anna Kasparian and using her as a tool to reinforce his arguments. And I think I'm not saying that's Anna needs to do something about that. And I don't know, you know, this just happened, so I have not followed up to see if she has responded to any of this, if she has tried to walk back any of or you know, deal with it in any way. So I cannot speak to that. I just know that right now she is being weaponized against my children, which terrifies me.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about my best friend, Tim Pool, and speaking very disrespectfully of him.
I know you just want to go see his chickens.
I really can't. I mean, look, this is going to be super awkward when I go to the skate park tonight. Everybody's expecting me, and it's going to be really, it's going to be like hanging over everything. Everybody's going to know what Andy said. Yeah, I think that, you know, I don't know the sort of specific Tim Pool thing that you're talking about. You know, I'm open to sort of looking at that, you know, in a future episode, and, you know, and diving into that. I will say that some of what I have seen, right, you know, from right wingers is sort of taking, you know, like the part where she's, you know, like some of the parts of some of these clips where she says, hey, I think some of the progressive narratives on this stuff get some stuff wrong, and kind of ignoring everything else that comes after that complicates it. And I think that the question is not going to be you know, is there something we can do to force Tim Pool to be an honest actor who portrays things as they are and doesn't distort them? I think that the sort of question is like, what's the messaging from us that counteracts the Tim Pools of the world the best? Brief reminder: we are absurdly over time, so we're going to wrap this up.
And I just one last thing. If
please.
Just a general thought. If you couldn't, if you know, going through the wrong puberty wasn't reversible, then how can you transition into the right gender as an adult?
Yeah.
So I don't think, you know, are there other things to be concerned about with, you know, I don't think there's any data necessarily to enough data to really talk about like long-term issues with people detransitioning. But the thing is, it's such a minority. It's like less than 1% of less than 1% of the population. Yeah. So it's like a fraction, you know, like we're talking like a couple hundred people.
I mean, I think what you're getting into there, I mean, are some more of the wrinkles of this that I don't, again, I mean, I think there are complicated issues here. I don't necessarily have a take on it. But I think that, which again, I hope doesn't read as indifference, because that's not how I mean it. I just mean that it's like literally I do not know enough about some of these things.
This is not something to really delve into and take apart right now, because I am also not the person to be doing this necessarily. I am not the best spokesperson for the trans community. I just happen to be here right now, and I have
obviously I get why this is extremely personal to you. You know, I just so yeah, I mean, again, some of the issues that you raise about puberty and detransition, stuff like that, I don't know, right? And I don't want to pretend to know, you know, for the purposes of the discussion. You know, I am pretty, you know, like, just in case anybody was confused by the super subtle joke before, I'm pretty open to the thought that Tim Pool did something wrong. If people recall my experiences with that dude in person, it was not particularly positive. You know, I have probably more reasons to have a low opinion of him than a lot of people, based on that experience. But I think I think the Tim Pools of the world are going to twist things according to their own agenda and present things in a way that meets that agenda. I think that's probably unavoidable. I think the real question is what's the best counter messaging, right? And what's the sort of way to what's the way to win over whoever can be won over, and how does drawing lines and saying, okay, here's who goes in the tent, here's who's outside of the tent, and when to sort of acknowledge that sometimes issues that are very important, that do have profound consequences for people's lives, are also complicated and nuanced. And there actually is room, but there are some things I think are very easy calls. I think there is room for disagreement on other aspects of it. There's a joke in the chat about how this level of nuance is very gay, but fair enough. But in any case, obviously, I wanted to get some stuff off my chest. Andy wanted to get some stuff off his chest. And we have kept everybody just ludicrously far beyond where we were going to. If I can just for the sake of ending on a lighter note, if I can get 30 seconds more of your time, Matt, there was actually a question for you in the chat, 6 hours ago or something, which was, how the fuck do you make time to read all of these people?
How do I do it? A lot of caffeine and doing exactly what Stephen King did. Not the mass amounts of cocaine part. Those days are long past. But allocating a couple hours every day to going through it. That's
not 80s Stephen King. That's not what we're talking about.
No, not 80s Stephen King. I mean, if that's your cup of poison, then by all means indulge. But I wouldn't recommend it as a long-term prospect for being particularly productive.
Right. Let me just say, Ben, I had a take on all of this, and everyone here is saved by the bell that we've run out of time. No one gets to hear my take.
In the post game, for patrons, God knows, maybe you'll hear his take. Probably not. There you go. Can't rule it out.
Thank you guys for your discussion. Thank you, Ben and Andy. That was more significant than what I was going to say. And but those who need to hear my take, it's what, $5 a month, I think, to hear Jake's take on everything afterward.
Yeah. Patreon.com/Ben Burgess, $5 a month. You can hear Jake's hottest takes.
Yep. And I mean, Andy, thanks a lot for being vulnerable that way. I thought that was really very moving. It kind of helped all of this issue resonate a lot more for me personally, as somebody who is very sympathetic with the objectives of the trans community, but doesn't really have quite the personal stake in it that you do, and your children do. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. We have post game. We have long-suffering Mean Djene Bajalan, and I don't know what rhymes with Jason, but whatever that word is, Jason Myles.
Jason?
Yeah. All right, Jason Myles and Mean Djene Bajalan, assuming they haven't long since given up on us, are ready to post game. So we are going to go to that right now. If you're a patron, you should have years ago gotten a link for the post game. Matt, thank you so much for more of your time than I'd asked for, because the way it worked out. The book is The Political Right and Equality. Turning back a couple times. Turning Back the Tide of Egalitarian Modernity from Routledge. It is about to come out in like a week and a half. Everybody should order that. The link is in the description below the box on which you are watching all of us talk. So going to go to the post game. If you're not a patron, consider it. Where else are you going to hear Jake's takes? Left is best.
That's the best.